Hello and welcome back to Tapp into Politics, the show where we cut through the noise, take a deep dive into the headlines and fight back against right-wing spin. And today we have a packed episode talking about Britain's role in global security and also taking a deep dive into the ongoing debate around sentencing guidelines. So joining me again is Mike Tapp MP. Welcome back, Mike. And also joining us is Eve McQuillan, who is a researcher and campaigner. So let's get started by taking, as I said, a deep dive into the headlines. And one thing which we did mention in the last episode, but is still very much dominating the news, is Ukraine. So the US has proposed a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, which Ukraine has agreed to. So all eyes are on Putin's response. And this is quite a development since the arguments that we saw between Zelensky and Trump in the White House. Mike, it would be really interesting to hear a bit about your views on the role that Keir Starmer and his government have played in this breakthrough.
I think he's been really impressive, and across the whole world, actually, people are looking at Keir and saying, this is a statesman, this is a true British leader. The things that we used to have and that we lost for 14 years under the Conservatives, and he's had that true professionalism and statesmanship. But also what I've found really interesting as an MP is that we're not commentators. And when something happens, when something's said, we don't have to take straight to social media or get straight on the news channels and say things. The fact is, there's a strategy. That strategy is peace, but a lasting peace, which is underpinned by security guarantees, hopefully including the United States, but certainly Europe. And to get there, we don't need to say things about everything that happens along the way. And a perfect example for me on that was the infamous falling out in the White House, where everyone had something to say about it across the whole of Europe, leaders across Europe and the world. Keir didn't. Instead, he picked up the phone. He spoke to Zelensky, he spoke to Mr. Trump, and he got it back on track. And now look at where we're at. You know, we're looking at potentially a ceasefire actually being a success. You know, Putin in the last 10 minutes, I know this is not going out live, has alluded to potentially accepting the measures in the ceasefire. But this is where now we're looking to Donald Trump. And we've got to have that trust that he will be firm with Putin and that those security guarantees will be there. And at the same time, we'll have Keir Starmer getting that coalition of the willing together and ensuring that moves forward. Because Keir's a doer. He likes to get things done and deliver. And the next step, of course, is having a tangible effort from Europe so that there's those security guarantees. I was with the Estonian ambassador just a few days ago, and they're very concerned in Estonia and the Baltics, Poland, Finland. You know, anyone with that border is concerned that any ceasefire going forward could be a regrouping opportunity to then have another pop at one of the other nations. So it's really important time, but great leadership.
Absolutely. It does feel a little bit more hopeful than it has done for quite a while. Eve, I'd really like to hear your thoughts around the ceasefire. Do you think it's feasible?
I think it comes down to how strong is that security guarantee and how realistic are European leaders' understanding of working with the unpredictable, erratic force that is Donald Trump. So Keir this week has worked pretty successfully with Trump, and as Mike was saying, strategically. But can that hold? That's the question. We've seen, Russia, a strong power militarily. Russia spends 40% of its GDP on defence. This is a big deal for them. Are European leaders in a position to provide that deterrent so we don't end up with a war that expands throughout Europe? And I think that remains to be seen, because so much of this relies still on an American security guarantee, which isn't very guaranteed. Ukraine's had to make some concessions to get to this point. You know, we had America taking away intelligence sharing, really big issue for Ukraine. They've had to make concessions to get to this point. Are these concessions too big? Are they too small? Are the Ukrainian people going to accept them? And is Trump going to accept them? And I think it remains to be seen what's going to happen there.
Definitely. And Mike, you're a former serviceman yourself. Keir has spoken a lot about, of course, support for Ukraine, and a big part of that has been emphasising the need for a comprehensive peace-building strategy, and that's really crucial to, we talked about building lasting peace in the region. As a former serviceman, what are your thoughts on potentially deploying British troops? And if we were to do that, what support would our armed forces need as part of this peace-building strategy?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, we need to complete the strategic defence review because numbers are down from the Conservative cuts over the last decade. And I don't know the exact number that's needed to sustain a peacekeeping force with the brigade turnovers, etc. But I would imagine, off the top of my head, it's probably an extra 10,000 troops, I'd say, around the 80,000 mark. But of course, it will be with other European nations as well. And in terms of support, so firstly, there needs to be that brigade turnover so that troops aren't out on the ground for longer than 5, 6, 7 months at a time. But also, in terms of military vehicles, ammunition, it all needs to be readily available. And this is where we have to be really careful with peacekeeping, because what you can't do is amass a force that the Russians might see as a threat. But instead, you have to be able to mobilise quickly across Europe so that if a threat does materialise, we can get there quickly, essentially. And this is a part of Keir's work with the EU. And actually, he was doing this months ago, getting out there and talking about troop mobilisation and making that better across Europe. But I mean, look, I was speaking with the ambassador the other day, and one of the worries for me is that sort of tripwire response in places like Estonia. Is that enough? Because do we want, worst case scenario, a Russian invasion getting into Tallinn and then have to push it back? No, I think where we really need to be in terms of security guarantees is that Russia wouldn't have the capability to invade. Instead of they invade and then we push back. And look, this is all hard talk, by the way. And look,
or the will to invade.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think by having a reliable, show of force, really, it acts as that deterrent in the same way that the nuclear deterrent does. But we have to tread really carefully with Mr. Putin, because he is unpredictable, and we know he has desires for the Baltics and Ukraine and potentially further. So we've got to make sure that our rhetoric isn't provoking, but at the same time providing defence. It's a really difficult diplomatic sort of wire to walk along, and I have absolute faith that Keir Starmer and the rest of Europe can do that. And that's why it's the coalition of the willing. So if you're not willing, fine. And we'll move it forward with those that are.
Definitely. I mean, unpredictable, right? That's a common theme across Ukraine, but also conflicts across the world. And there have also been more recent developments when we talk about Syria. So, of course, December 2024, that was the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime. And that was, of course, a turning point in Syria's history. And many hoped that this would be, the dawn of a new democratic Syria. But continuing violence and instability does continue to pose a really, really big challenge. So, Eve, where do we go now? And can the Labour government play a bigger role? Should the Labour government play a bigger role in supporting a lasting peace in Syria as well?
Yeah, so I think what we saw over the weekend, where we saw initially clashes between security forces and supporters of the former Assad regime, escalating to massacres of civilians, should be really, really concerning. And we also saw, particularly those massacres, I don't want to accuse government forces of these massacres. I think it seems likely. A lot of analysts have said that these massacres were carried out by volunteer fighters alongside government forces, but really serious, horrible human rights abuses, and really concerning for the future of the Syrian transition. I think what we've seen from the UK government so far has been slow, but has been positive. So I think the willingness to talk with parties is important. I think the willingness to remove sanctions is important as well. There will be no peace and stability in Syria until there is economic development for people. If people don't have basic economic development, then they're going to be pushed into joining these militias. There's going to be more violence. So I think that's positive. What I would like to see from the government now is using its powers within international institutions. And I think we need to be starting having the discussion about, do we need to see a UN force in Syria to provide that security guarantee? Because at the moment, the government forces are not able to provide that guarantee. There are too many militants from outside of Syria still in Syria, and there are too many human rights concerns. And that stability needs to be there for any kind of successful transition to happen.
Mike, do you think it's important for our government to engage with the Syrian government and keep in constant communication around this?
I think we have to have our diplomatic efforts ongoing, and I know they are. I mean, what happened at the weekend is still not 100% clear, so I know there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to establish exactly what has happened. So no, big decisions have been made. I completely take the point on, economic stability will help Syria move forward, but it needs to be moving forward to a true democracy, and we're not there to prop up dictators, but at the same time there is a bigger picture where that stability will benefit us here and the wider region, which is obviously in turmoil at the moment. But look, there's a lot going on at the moment, isn't there, around the world, and I wouldn't say that's one of the top priorities at the moment, but certainly a priority to ensure that diplomacy remains and that we're doing the right thing to help bring about lasting peace there as well.
Well, exactly. There is so much going on in the world, and we are facing an increasingly volatile and unstable world. And all of these developments that we've discussed do have real consequences for Britain, for our security, our economy, and our global standing. So, I mean, I would like to see, and we already have seen this begin, the Labour government ensuring that Britain remains secure and resilient and really at the forefront of this fight.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what we've seen in some of these conflicts is the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, all behind them, whether it's funding, training, and that sort of military support, whether it's China and Iran, the Houthis, Hezbollah, what we've seen with Bashar Assad as well. So there is this almost axis of evil rising again that we've seen in the past, and we have to ensure that can't take hold and work hard to support the likes of Israel in overcoming the challenges they have there, whilst of course bearing in mind the human rights issues that are just as important. But yeah, global security is important for us. We've seen our energy prices going up, and that's in large part down to Ukraine, and if we can see a peaceful resolution, then hopefully that will start to fix that as well. But I'm very excited about the idea of renewable energy, so that we rely less on the likes of Putin for oil and gas, which the Conservatives are not interested in at all.
It's really refreshing to see us take back a bit of independence. Eve, what's your take on that?
So I think we've moved a long way over the last couple of years away from international standards in terms of human rights, protection of civilians, and it's something I'm really concerned about. We've seen that happen before, but I think what we've seen over the last 10 years, the Russians supporting Assad and Assad using chemical weapons against his own people in Syria. What we've seen, some of the human rights abuses that have taken place in the Israel-Gaza war, really concerning. And I think we're moving away from this system of international norms about protection of human rights. And I think that's a real problem. And what I would like to see from the Labour government is a way to work diplomatically to strengthen some of these norms, which are really important, and which the settlement after the Second World War in terms of international humanitarian protection is really important, and it's been ripped apart, and we should make sure that our diplomacy takes into account these norms, pushes these norms forward, because they protect us as well as other countries. So it's not just a battle of who's the strongest versus the strongest, because that won't guarantee peace and security across the world.
And I'd say that is the approach that Labour government are taking, as much as Israel's a perfect example of this, isn't it? We 100% back Israel in its right to existence and to defend itself from its terror neighbours, which is what it's got on the doorstep, while at the same time making sure that we condemn those potential human rights abuses that we're seeing, and put pressure on, for example, to get aid and water into the desperate people in Gaza, because it's unacceptable to block that. What it isn't is an either or, which unfortunately in politics, and this is relevant to why we're doing this podcast, is you'll find the left take one, the right take one, but actually the answer's in the middle. It's wrong to commit human rights abuses, and it's wrong to attack Israel. And by the way, I have to add that if any of the terror groups on their doorstep had the same firepower as Israel, Israel would not exist now.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
Well, it's no easy job for this Labour government, but I am just so reassured that we have a Labour government in place, and not more of the chaos that we saw under the Tories, because I just wouldn't trust them to be able to manage us through this time. Thank you so much, Mike and Eve, and we'll see you very soon.